So joining us now to break down the results of the French legislative elections and also, of course, most importantly, what they mean for all of us is Daniel Nichanian. He is the editor-in-chief of Bolt's magazine. Great to see you, Daniel.
It's great to be back. Thanks for having me.
So we have your preliminary tweet, and I don't know if some of these results have shifted, but let's go ahead and put this up on the screen. So likely break down a full new French parliament going off of Le Monde France. Macron, he's of course the incumbent president. He got about 249 seats. That's about 102 down from where he was. The left coalition got 155. That's a major gain, but not everything that they wanted. The right, quite surprisingly, the right got 71, and then Le Pen's party, which is the sort of far-right party, they surged quite surprisingly to around 89. So the overall result is Macron is blocked from getting a majority. This, I understand, is quite extraordinary in recent French history. So talk us through those results and what the likely implications are.
Right, that's right. And I understand it can be a bit confusing to navigate those four camps, and the numbers you saw there are almost identical to what was announced a couple of hours later as the final results. In recent French history, and by that I mean the past 40 years, 50 years, it's been very much a left versus right camps that are facing one another, and one or the other got a majority. But now that we have seen a fragmentation of the parties in France, much like we're seeing in many other countries in Europe, to some extent in the US as well, that's become much more obviously complicated, and for the first time, this is the weakest that a plurality party has been in the current French regime, and so we're really in unprecedented grounds right now as to what the Macron party, which technically has a plurality but is quite far from the majority, is going to do to be able to govern, because you can't really do anything in France without the parliament in terms of passing laws, in terms of really passing anything, and they don't necessarily have a clear other ally that is willing to enter a formal pact with them. So the most that we're going to see in the coming month, coming year, is going to be very informal minority government with informal moments of on specific bills, specific text getting to a majority. There's a lot of results to unpack here, but the big one again is that the incumbent president, Emmanuel Macron, expected to have a very strong majority, and everything sort of collapsed in the course of a month or two, and they find themselves unable right now to govern with any sort of stability.
What should we make of the Le Pen party results? How much does that match in the previous election? And what does it mean in terms of governance for that party to have so many seats?
It really can't be understated how much that is the main headline. The main takeaway in this election is the fact that Le Pen's party got 89 seats. So, in some way, they're still very, very far away from a majority. So that could be taken as a sign of weakness from maybe outside of the context. But as you may have seen in the tweet that started the segment, they had 8 seats in the parliament that just preceded this one, and that's where they've always been. Now, we have all heard of Le Pen for so long. They've obviously been a very strong party in France, and they always, for at least 10, 15 years, have been stabilized around 20, 25% of the vote. What really changed right now is that France has a two-round system, where in the second round, you need to get a majority of all votes cast to actually get a seat in parliament. You need to get a majority of the votes, because it's a two-round runoff. And that's been a huge obstacle to the far right, because all of the other parties have effectively formed what in France is called the Republican Front, to block the far right from getting 50%. So they all sort of coalesce around whoever the alternative to Le Pen's party is. And that's what unprecedentedly in French recent history just imploded this week. And that just entirely just went out of the window just like that. And they went from 8 seats to 89 suddenly. And in many constituencies, many districts, Le Pen's party got 55, 60, sometimes 65% of the vote, as the voters of the eliminated parties just didn't coalesce against the far right, and that obviously is a very, very, very big change in French politics.
Got it.
What do you attribute that to?
Right. So what really changed over the past 8-9 days that's very new. There's obviously been a very slow erosion of the so-called Republican Front over the past 20-30 years, and I'm not going to do the whole history of every small change that happened to that Republican Front. What really changed over the past 8 days is that the Macron camp, which is a center-right force right now, found itself against the left coalition, an unexpectedly strong left coalition that didn't exist 2 months ago, and managed to form a coalition and find itself in a runoff in the vast majority of districts, often against the Macron party. And the party of Macron decided as their main strategy to effectively co-opt the language of the Republican Front that it's used against the far right, against the left coalition, starting to say things like, we need to have a Republican front against the left coalition, starting to say, calling for a barrage, a shield against the left coalition, and this created some tensions even within the president's party, but saying that the left and the far right are equivalent to one another in terms of the threat that they pose to the republic. The president said a week ago that you need to vote for the republic, meaning for his party, effectively casting all of his opposition in the anti-Republican camp. And that just automatically erodes everywhere the ability of voters to think of Le Pen's party as a specific threat to the rest of the democratic debate, and contributed greatly over the past week to imploding that anti-Le Pen front.
The other thing, Daniel, I was curious about, and I know you're not supposed to ask a question you don't know the answer to, but I genuinely don't know the answer to this because I don't have a sophisticated understanding of French politics or the mechanics of the French legislative branch. But because Macron was unable to win an outright majority, does that make it likely that his policies will be pulled more to the right? Because I read some analysis that most likely partners that he is going to find on some of his legislative initiatives, in particular, like lifting the retirement age, are going to come even more to the right of where his party is situated. So do you think that the end effect of this is to actually pull Macron's party even in his legislative agenda even more to the right?
Probably, but it's a slight unknown right now, because in some ways the Macron party ended up so weak, even weaker than the final polls indicated, that the addition of his party and the traditional conservative party, which is called the Republicans in France as well, so easy enough from an American standpoint, their addition barely gets to a majority, and the Republican Party doesn't have particular incentives right now to help Macron's party, because it's easier to be in the opposition, and they certainly will not form an actual coalition. It is true that on text by text, bill by bill, when it comes down to voting things, the president's party is going to look to its right, is going to look to Republican Party to get to a majority on certain texts. That's just where it is. And that's, to some degree, that's in part because the ideological ties between Emmanuel Macron and the conservatives are already quite strong. In some ways they might be pulled further to the right on specific amendments, but it's not like fundamentally changing the fabric of what the president's priorities are, especially when it comes to economic issues, as you just mentioned, Krystal, and that's something I know we've discussed in the past. One of his main planks that he ran on is to raise the retirement age in France. That's obviously something that conservatives will find they will find that they like it if they want to, but it's just that explosive reform in the context of French politics, given how easily social movements start, labor movements start in France, that for a government to do that from such a position of weakness would just be very surprising at this stage, as opposed to just being unable to do much at all.
And then lastly, Daniel, what do you think this rebuke of Macron is about? Because also, I mean, obviously he won re-election and pretty easily, but at least as an outside observer and listening to your analysis, that seemed more of a vote against Le Pen than it was affirmatively a vote for Macron. And then this is really quite a stunning rebuke of him and of his party and of the direction he's been taking this country. So what do you put at the core of that rebuke in terms of voters' concerns?
Right. I mean, there's so much happening here, and it really gets to what we were talking about earlier. The fact that Macron got a fairly strong victory against Le Pen, though a much weaker one than 5 years ago in the presidential election, was in part a symptom of how strong the Republican front, as I was explaining, still was 2 months ago, and especially in the context of a presidential election. He only got 25% in the first round, which was actually quite weak. And we're seeing some of the same forces we're seeing elsewhere, right? We're seeing a very strong left opposition to Macron, angered in part by some of the policies that we were just discussing on wanting to weaken the retirement system right now, or at least weaken the pension system. And we're seeing a lot of anger. We've seen a lot of angers over the past 5 years on health policies, right? Some of the same conversations we've seen in the United States, but maybe at a different scale. A lot of divide between the urban vote and the rural vote and the suburban vote. And maybe the president's strength in France is that he sort of is at a mediocre level everywhere, rather than particularly strong in one place or another, which, the left has been stronger in urban areas, the far right or conservatives in more rural areas. And the same factors of economic instability. And Macron, between the presidential election and the parliamentary election, frankly, he really thought he was going to get a majority. This was not supposed to happen. This was not supposed to be competitive. And he made, as prime minister, he installed someone with very little experience in politics, with a more technocratic background, again, leaning into his propensity of trying to centralize power and thinking he was going to have very easy time for 5 years. And, all of these are things that I think from an American perspective, we can see why there is from both the left and the right, opposition to that sort of way of governing.
Yeah, indeed. We definitely see it
really
here. Saw it just in Colombia as well. Some of these trends seem to be significant across really around the globe. So, Daniel, thank you so much for breaking this down, helping us to understand it.
Thanks, Daniel.
Awesome. Thanks for having me.
Our pleasure.
Thank you guys so much for watching. Really appreciate it. As for all the premium subscribers, the announcement, it's coming Thursday. We've been assured. It's finally done. We filled out the forms. It's happening. All right, for all of your support and more, it means a lot. As we said yesterday, you going on Bill Maher was like a great affirmation of what we do. I've never been happier in order to do the show exactly the way that we do. And it's awesome, just meeting people out in the wild and hearing what the show means to them. So thank you for all the premium people who support us and who really just help support our vision, because we could not do it without you.
Love you guys, and we will see y'all back here on Thursday. Cable news is ripping us apart, dividing the country, making it impossible to function as a society, and making it impossible to know just what is true and what is false. But the good news is they are failing and they know it.
That is why we're building something new, a new mainstream, a healthier one, something more trustworthy, something that we are going to need in one of the most pivotal times in American history. We are building up here for the midterms, for the upcoming presidential election, but we need your help. So if you can help us out by becoming a premium member today at breakingpoints.com, we're trying to change America for the better and the entire world.
So what are you waiting for, guys? Go to breakingpoints.com and sign up and help us build a new mainstream.